and by regional agreements such as the Bow Declaration on Security, which was agreed by leaders at last year's Pacific Islands Forum meeting in Nauru. In Canberra, we've established a dedicated office to oversee Australia's support and coordination of growth to combating climate change. Our Step Up will engage directly with these challenges. Many Pacific Island countries face challenges around cost, scale and sustainability of service due to their size and the remoteness from major markets. The geographic reality of the Pacific region is of course beyond the control of Pacific governments, but we can take steps together to reduce transaction costs by working together as a region. As a partner in the region, Australia has been supporting efforts to harness the potential of regional integration. That means committing to support countries to take steps such as pooling resources in areas such as specialised health services or regional security training. And it means supporting increased trade and labour mobility for the region. One way we can support regional economic development is through a regional economic agreement, PACER+. A total of 9 Pacific Island countries have signed up to PACER+, an agreement that sets the Pacific region up for a new era of economic prosperity. And of course, private sector development lies at the heart of the Australian aid program's objective to increase sustainable economic growth across the Pacific. Whilst the private sector is an engine of sustainable economic growth and poverty reduction, it does not act alone. The choices government make are of course critical to encouraging or discouraging private investment in an economy. So Australia has partnered with multilateral banks such as the ADB, the IMF and the IFC to work closely with Pacific governments to improve their business and trade environments for the private sector through regulatory reforms. The private sector also relies on access to infrastructure to support growth. That's why on Monday of this week, the Australian government operationalised a $2 billion infrastructure financing facility to help Pacific Island countries bridge their infrastructure financing gaps. The facility, the AIFFP, will provide much needed resources for Pacific governments to construct and maintain infrastructure that is crucial to their economic growth and to their resilience. In this side of the world, Pacific countries are vulnerable to the effects of climate change and disasters, and Australia is committed to working closely with our Pacific neighbours to address these issues. We have committed to reduce Australia's carbon emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2030, and will continue to be a voice for the region in critical climate talks at the international level. Because we recognise it is such an important issue to us, climate change and disaster resilience is a policy objective that is mainstreamed across all our aid development programs. But perhaps the most significant contribution we can make to mobilising resources for the Pacific region is to invest in gender equality and the economic empowerment of women. We all know that nations thrive when women participate in society as equals. For example, the World Bank has estimated that eliminating barriers to women's full participation in the job market in developing countries could increase labour productivity by up to 25%, which is why the Australian government has committed $320 million over the 10 years from 2012 to improve the political, economic and social opportunities for women in the region through the Pacific Women's Program. In its first 4 years of implementation, the Pacific Women Program has funded over 100 activities around women's agency, women in leadership and decision making, women's economic empowerment and ending violence against women and girls. These targeted interventions have enabled over 3,400 Pacific women to access financial literacy training and financial services, over 22,000 women to access crisis support services, and over 9,000 women to take on leadership roles at the community, provincial and national level. Gender equality is a policy objective that is also mainstreamed in all of our aid development programs. Ladies and gentlemen, Australia is proud to be stepping up our work with our Pacific neighbours. The Pacific Update is an opportunity to reflect on how all of us in government, in academia, in civil society, in the private sector, in the developed community, can work together to accelerate development in this region. I want to again commend USP and the ANU for coming together to organise this Pacific Update. I wish everyone the best in your deliberations over the next 3 days. Thanks very much and good morning.
Thank you, John, for those opening remarks. It covered a lot of ground in terms of Australia's engagement in the region. I'll now invite Winston Dukaran for the keynote address this morning. Before I invite him, I'd like to introduce Winston Dukaran, who's traveled all the way from Trinidad and Tobago to be with us this morning. Winston is currently Professor of Practice at the University of West Indies. Previously, he has been the Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Senior Economist at the Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean, a member of the Executive Board of the Inter-American Development Bank, Governor of the Caribbean Development Bank. He is an alumni of London School of Economics and a visiting scholar at Harvard University. In Winston's political career, he was elected to Parliament in 1981. In 2010, he was the Minister of Finance and served as Minister of Foreign Affairs between 2012 and 2015. In his capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Winston was part of the Heads of States representation at the 3rd International Conference on Small Island Developing States in Samoa in 2014, which adopted the Samoa Pathway. Winston has written and edited a number of books, including Choices and Change, Reflections on the Caribbean in 1996, The Caribbean Quest, Directions for Structural Reform in Global Economy in 1998, Uncertainty, Stability and Challenges of Economic and Monetary Policy, A Small State Perspective in 2006, Power, Politics and Performance, a Partnership Approach for the Development of Small States, 2012, Crisis and Promise in the Caribbean, Politics and Convergence in 2015, and he has a book which is forthcoming, titled as Caribbean on the Edge. So it's a pleasure to invite Winston Dukaran, and he's going to talk to us on the topic Caribbean on the Edge, regionalism and insights on the integration of the Pacific Islands.
Vice Chancellor, let me first of all bring greetings to you from the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, who asked me to convey fraternal greetings to you on your assumption of leadership at this very important regional institution. You indicated that the University of the South Pacific is celebrating its 50th year of existence, and so too is the University of the West Indies, as another regional institution is about to celebrate its 70th year as a regional institution. I want to say a special word of appreciation for being able to say hello to you on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and to meet you in this very important function. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Australia to Fiji, Mr. John Keats, I want to say a special word of appreciation for your kind words and your introduction of the importance of this specific forum. And I also say to you that we have had very good relationships between Caribbean countries and Australia over the many years. And I have had the fortune of knowing many of your ambassadors there have always distinguished themselves in building good relationships between Australia and small economies of the world. May I also take this opportunity to say a special thanks to the organizers for inviting me to be here, to Nilesh Gulash, the lecturer and head of the Department of Economics, and of course to Professor Stephen Hawes of the Australian National University. I was particularly pleased for this invitation, which had its origin some 10 years ago, when the then Dean, Professor Biman Prasad, visited Trinidad and Tobago and hinted to me that someday will come when he may have the opportunity to see me here in Fiji. I thank you, Biman, for this happening as it has happened now. I want to start my discourse here today with a little philosophical introduction of my own life as an academic and as a politician. I've always felt the need to marry both, and I've never seen fundamental distinctions between their roles, for they do serve the same purpose, which is the development of the societies in which we live. So I did attend, at the initiation of my political career, a meeting at the Gurdwara in my hometown of Tudapuna in Trinidad and Tobago. And at that time, the Sahib said to me something that I have never forgotten. I was young in those days. And he said, "You are now entering the world of politics. What can I tell you?" And his comment, not to me necessarily, but in the context of the philosophy of mixing the two, is that you will walk in the rain, but you must not get wet. And I reflected on that for all my life. Walking in the rain is getting dirty in the affairs of our people. Not getting wet is not allowing yourself to be contaminated by the issues that contaminate power seekers in our society. And that has been a guiding light that I received from the Gurdwara at that time in my career. So today, I am really going to bring together what I consider to be the practice as well as the theory in a specific area of which I'm going to speak about, which is regionalism and insights for the specific islands. But doing that in the context of the Caribbean region, and more specifically, dealing with it in the terms of the contemporary issues in the Caribbean region. So I will start, first of all, by defining what I think are the key issues in the Caribbean region. You showed me. Maybe we should locate this in the map. Caribbean is on the other side of the globe. And the islands are linked from South America all the way to North America. And on the other side, we have the Pacific Islands, many more islands. And we always hear reference, especially when we're in international forum, of these island economies, small economies in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. So I'm very pleased to be here to try and see what is the similarities as well as the differences. So let me start by defining the Caribbean. The Caribbean has been described as a place of harmony and discord. It has been defined as that in the context of the history, the geography, the politics, and the geopolitical situation. It has always been a place of hidden wealth. And the existence of the islands have seen many areas in which this hidden wealth has been explored for and exploited for. From Castro's Cuba's revolution, and 150 years before that, the Haiti's Black Rebellion for true independence, the region has come to be known as a place in which no island is an island. The result of the discovery of centuries ago of persons from Europe and peoples from Africa and from Asia have left the Caribbean as a crucible of globalization, and some writers have described it as a place where globalization started. It is in that context, therefore, that the Caribbean region has been faced today with a sense of what I describe as a tense stability. And in that era of tense stability, to some extent accentuated by the new political landscape of protectionism, isolationism, terrorism, and as the North Atlantic powers turn inward and the geo-economic axis shift in the new era of great power rivalry and competition, the Caribbean is on the edge of geography and perhaps can be described as a policy standstill, pondering which way to turn and how to turn. This is where we are. It is in that sense that the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, in an address in Port of Spain on the subject of the future of the Caribbean, had this to say. She hoped that the Caribbean will make its institutions fit for purpose and effective implementation, and maximize this time of global action. As I turn across into the region of the Pacific, I recollect an article in which the former Prime Minister of Australia, in speaking on the subject of Asia Pacific, a community for the 21st century, urged participants of the need to plan. And this is what he said: we need a plan with each other rather than against each other, as has often been the custom in the past. It is in that context, therefore, that many writers have been looking at the prospect of regionalism in the Pacific and regionalism in the Caribbean. And today I want to just elaborate a bit on those themes. In the Pacific, and on studies done on the Pacific, it is argued that regionalism is an inevitable process. But I have learned regionalism in the Pacific is a very unique process. Unique in its own way because of its geography, because of its geopolitics, and because of its security concerns, as has been reflected in many relationships. But what has also happened, and very similar to us, is the tensions between regionalism and nationalism remain very much alive. It is in that context, therefore, that we will move on to the theoretical framework of integration and regionalism. There are two basic thoughts that have emerged in the literature on the subject as to what are the premises upon which regionalism is based. One is the hegemonic regionalism, and the other one is the integrationist regionalism. What do they mean? By hegemonic regionalism, what we are talking about is the dominance of a single actor. By an integrationist regionalism, we are talking about the emergence of a supranational authority and perhaps the erosion of sovereignty. There are elements of both in every integration movement that there is. But it's important for us to understand clearly what is the genesis of the birth of the integration process in our countries. A very well-known political scientist from the American University, I.T.S, have written extensively on this issue of the world and regionalism. And he called it for what he called a multiplex system of regionalism, in which neither the single actor nor the supra-authority is at stake. So one of the first issues we got to face in our region is the nature of our integration process. And indeed, is there room for a new governance process in the integration processes in which we have found ourselves in? The Asian way, as it has been described, is founded on plural leadership. It's a flexible, non-legalistic form of authority and is based on the process of regional interactions and cooperation, featuring informality, consensus building, and non-confrontational bargaining styles. This has led to what has been described as an open regionalism. To some extent, therefore, you are ahead of the game in terms of building an interregionalism between different parts of the world. And recently there have been evidence of such changes taking place. The Caribbean, on the other hand, have been structured in an integrationist mold of regionalism. Originally established in 1973, it was revised in 2001, and it was revised to transform itself into a borderless community in the expectation that it will pool its resources and exploit opportunities that will not be able to do separately as scattered small islands. The revised treaty of 2001 was expected to embrace a single market and economy, or in other words, a single economic space. These new arrangements have created new challenges. The Jamaican government, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, country in the Caribbean region, in the CARICOM region, established a commission which was headed by a former Prime Minister, Bruce Golden, to look at the relationship between that country and the Caribbean community. And it came to the conclusion that these new arrangements are not working and cannot be expected to work. It described two phenomena. One is what is called the integration fatigue that has developed over the many years. And two, the implementation deficit that has emerged in the process. So much so that a well-known regionalist and the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth, who is of Caribbean origin, expresses concern pointedly. And I just want to quote what he said. "We have crept through the fractured promises of the Treaty of Chaguaramas and the Declaration of Ghana, and through innumerable pious declarations, affirmations, and commitments. The role of unfulfilled pledges and promises and unimplemented decisions is staggering and shameful." The Golden Report, of which I made reference to, said that Jamaica should withdraw from the single market and economy, the single economic space, but should maintain its membership in CARICOM in a different status if things do not change within the next 5 years. I identified this to suggest to you that the Caribbean region, although it has had tremendous success in integration of its economies, have been facing within recent times severe fractures. And that is why I described this as Caribbean on the edge. What has caused these fractures? There are two issues that have emerged. One is the political obstacles to pursuing the integration agenda, which is a big subject, but clearly it has reared its head in the decision-making process. And two, the institutional architecture that is now prevailing. Both of these have generated a new debate among policymakers, among those who are looking at how to solve the issues before us. So when policy and practice shows some signs of rupture, we have to turn to some theory to see where the answer lies. As a student of political economy, I went back to look at the theoretical underpinnings of the development process, to try and understand exactly what has happened. The cycle of ideas in Caribbean development have moved over the last 50 years and have adopted different measures of its own success. Earlier on, trade and competitiveness was seen as an engine of growth. Capital flows and structural adjustment, human skills and productivity, innovation and entrepreneurship, integration and convergence, and within recent times, sustainable development. It is strange how these specific paradigms were adopted over time. Together, they become a powerful matrix for development, but individually, they have seemed to be lacking in trying to bring about changes. So the cycle of ideas in development have gone full circle. What, therefore, were the underlying themes of the development strategy? The first theme was based on the theory of growth. Many of you, especially those of you in the field of economics, may remember the Arthur Lewis theory of growth, for which he received a Nobel Peace Prize. He is of St. Lucian descent, and became the paramount paradigm for development in the region. But it was based on the concept of a linear growth process, step by step, movement by movement. What has now emerged is that there is need to relook at the development paradigm, to try and engage into a non-linear process. Non-linear in the sense that the development will not move step by step. So all the different paradigms that I have identified were examples that will move step by step, only to find that the elusive goals of improving the quality of life has not emerged. Three new things have emerged out of that discussion. One is the issue of environmental quality. And I was very pleased to read and to hear and to listen today of the efforts that have been made here in the area of climate change, a major issue, both for us and for you. But the issue of environmental quality of the governance process remains a missing link in the Caribbean region. And the recent study in this regard have identified that as critical, not only a funding issue, as it is sometimes viewed, but also a governance issue that has to be addressed. The second area that has emerged is this concept of the structural waste. It has been argued that our GDP could double if we were to use all our inputs more efficiently. So there's something called structural waste. How much of our economic activity is devoted on structural waste? And in so doing, we have to find new business models that incorporate the structural waste into the production process. And this has led to a whole discussion on how do you create value in the production process. Thirdly, convergence. Integration is a coming together of a number of countries with a view of removing tariffs and open up the flow for goods and investment and services, and in some cases, people, which is always a contentious issue. Convergence, however, is trying to use the existing boundaries and national boundaries and find ways for countries to converge. And a bit later, I'll give you two examples of successful convergence, or at least attempts at successful convergence in Latin America and the Caribbean. And finally, how do you really measure economic resilience? What I have learned in my few hours, I cannot be an expert, I will not be, but I've learned that there is a kind of resilience at the level of the community, in the Pacific communities, perhaps rooted in the cultural experiences of the past, perhaps rooted in the nationalism that exists in the region. But what I'm talking about here is beyond the natural resilience of the people, so that you've been able to overcome many of the fundamental issues that we face in terms of poverty, because of that resilience of the communities themselves. And I believe the ambassador spoke of the partnership between civil society and government, private sector and others. So it's become, you have been practicing that long before it became issues in the literature in places like the World Bank and elsewhere. You are an example here of community resilience. That community resilience, however, has not reflected itself in economic resilience. And your vulnerabilities, as was pointed out, are not only in the area of climate change, but also in other areas. So what are some of the risks that we are facing globally, both here and both in the Caribbean? There are 5 areas of concern that have been raised as global risk that small countries and even large countries are facing. One is economic vulnerabilities, as opposed to the other form of vulnerabilities. 2 is the geopolitical tensions in the time in which we live. 3 is major societal and political strains, and we see evidence of that taking place right now in Hong Kong, as it has happened in other parts of the world. For environmental fragilities, of which the Vice Chancellor mentioned. And finally, an area of technological instabilities and disruptions. And this update is going to cover many of these things from the agenda that I have seen. These are the global risks that we are facing. And it is in that context, therefore, that perhaps what we need to do is to redefine the parameters of our development strategy. Value chain has become an important instrument for regional integration. It is not now part of the development thinking in many parts of the world, and new business models are attempting to develop value change. A study done by the McKinsey Global Institute identified that value change is going to take place, value chain development is going to take place on a regional basis. So we must capture that, whatever the region is, much more than on a global basis. Secondly, that we can only expand our economic space through competitiveness and convergence. Because you cannot, in a small space, experience the potential of high competitiveness and convergence. Thirdly, learning by doing must become an important aspect of the internal dynamics for development. And finally, stimulus, which is the injection so often of capital, must steadily evolve, not merely repeat it itself. So we have to ask the question, is our development strategy, in fact, repeating itself? It is in this context that statistics have shown by the McKinsey Global Institute that interregional share of global trade has increased by 2.7 percentage points since 2013. And that if we look beyond that, we'll see emerging markets will consume 2/3 of the world's manufacturing goods as these countries continue to deepen their participation in global flows of goods, services, finance, people, and data. New technologies across global value chains has one clear effect: lowering transaction costs and enabling more global flows of goods and services. The point of what has emerged in the literature is that these trends must be taken about in developing the integration model of the future. More interregionalism. Expanding the integration space. In Pacific, there's been 2 tracks. The critical part, building confidence and negotiation at the same time. And now the emergence of a new regionalism, bridging the gap between policy and action. So what are the risks ahead? And the question is, are we sleepwalking into a crisis? we are faced with a new set of challenges. Taking back control within countries and in multilateral institutions. We are faced with the development crisis of including the value chain in our development strategy. And of course, the blue economy, and I was very pleased to hear the Vice Chancellor said that he has established a chair for oceans in this university. The creation of macro stability is not a funding issue, but it's a question of converting that fund into buffers to deal with external shocks. It's a different approach to it. Inertia in the integration system and in the governance process. A strategy for interregionalism, of which I spoke about. Integration based on public goods as opposed to security concerns. Convergence and the flow of funds. And all this requires a new kind of diplomacy. It is in that context, therefore, that we got to move forward. But to do so, the issue arises, how do we convert this into a practical set of measures? The Samoa pathway, of which Dr. Nilesh mentioned, I attended, attempted to look at these issues from the point of view of developing an action plan for resilience, which I spoke about. But in the context of the specific region, I have, and in the context of what I've said here today, I have identified 9 points in which perhaps the Pacific region may consider the policy implications and develop a research agenda in order to assist not only this region, but the entire concept of integration as a form of development. Firstly, incorporate a strategy of value chain in the production process. Whether it's possible or not, I don't know. Design an open economic space that includes the blue economy. We are moving in that direction. Sustain efforts for macro stability and create financial buffers to insulate against external shocks and negative externalities. Identify inertia in the integration system and simplify the governance process. Examine the design the institutional frame of the integration project to reflect the convergence concept that promotes the flow of funds. Assess the missing gaps in environmental governance of the Samoa pathway and take steps to fill them. Adopt a proactive strategy for interregionalism that will expand space. Develop integration projects that promote public goods in the region. Clarify the economic, security, and political dimensions of regionalism and engage in a new kind of diplomacy, which I describe as knowledge diplomacy in a wider Pacific region. These are the experience that the Caribbean region has had to face, and these are the issues that we too have to face at different stages and in different places. But there is no doubt in my mind that what has happened now is a redefinition of the theory of integration itself. And it will be well advised if we begin at the university level to redefine the theory of integration in the context of a unique situation and our special characteristics against this background which I have identified. So the issue has now emerged. To do that is not only an economic matter, and it's not only a technical matter. It is a matter of economics and politics. It's a matter of development and diplomacy. The first question is, how do we bring about a synergy between economic and political logic? That has been the problem that we in the Caribbean region have not been able to grapple with in a meaningful way. Regional institutions, by their very definition, are fraught with new challenges. It is said that the only two institutions in the Caribbean that function without any real opposition is the University of the West Indies as a regional institution and the West Indies cricket team as a sporting organization. All other institutions are faced with major challenges. And now we are facing what we call inertia. The last study have suggested that there are 18 institutions in the Caribbean focusing on integration measures. But while you have all these measures and you have governments having to fund them, you have the index of integration not growing. So therefore you face with a major problem of institutional rationalization. I don't know to what extent that problem exists, but I suspect it probably will exist from what little I've read so far on it. So bringing the economic and political logic together is perhaps the biggest challenge facing us. The second challenge has to do with the design. The trade-off between the implementation design, the deficit and the design. And this has been the major lessons I think we could learn from the region. It has been argued that Caribbean integration is not working because the implementation process is not working. And all you've got to do is to make it work. And then there's a blame game develops. Who is causing the implementation process not to work? Why it is that Jamaica is saying that they have to look at this thing again. But the truth is, it is not the implementation deficit that is the problem. It is the design of the integration process itself. So we have a trade-off between what I call deficit on one hand or design on the other hand. And it may well be that you may have to look in the context of the region, this particular area of design as opposed to implementation. Now, do you have an integration design? Is the Pacific plan such, or not? And if not, is it based on the issues that are going to help develop it? In the final analysis, integration is not a goal in its own right. It is there to assist the development of these countries. And therefore, it must be linked back to that. So it comes now the synergy between political and economic logic. As someone who has been involved on both sides of the coin, I understand fully well how those who are on the side of the policy blame the politicians for lack of political will. And those on the political side blame the policymakers for not giving me all the options. And that is a debate that's going on in the press, in the journals, and elsewhere. It's a constant debate. It's a natural debate. The blaming game is a natural debate, but we have to find the right synergy between the political and economic logic. It is in that context that foreign policy develops as an issue as well. Recently, we have a major issue in the region with respect to Venezuela. And it was very difficult for Caribbean countries to come to a unified position on Venezuela. This has not worked for the benefit of a solution in Venezuela, nor has it worked for the benefit of the region. Today we are facing a great influx of Venezuelans into Trinidad and Tobago. It has created some domestic concerns. But the government very wisely has decided to regularize it because it is viewed not so much as a momentary problem, but it is viewed as part of a human migration that has resulted from economic and political factors elsewhere. In fact, those of us who came in the region, whether it's from Africa or from Asia or from Europe, were in terms of economic pursuits. So too are the Venezuelans in Trinidad. and a new dimension has started. So when we look at the issue of the diplomacy, we have to look at the multilateral institutions. I have argued, and this is my own view, some people support it, some don't, that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have always viewed our problems of the lack of funds as a temporary phenomenon. That is to say that there are problems in the country, they look at issues of how to fix it, and they come up with the injection of IMF funds or some funds. Funding in the region is not a temporary phenomenon, it is a structural phenomenon. And if you look at it over time, you will see that the region has been a net exporter of funds rather than an importer of funds. So when you bring these funds in, you are not changing the structure of the flow of funds. So in other words, and writers at the university have argued, the persistence of underdevelopment in the region is because of the flow of funds. And it comes back to the very point I made earlier, that the region was a crucible for globalization. And to this extent, there is some rethinking that has to be done in the context of the flow of funds and the work of the World Bank. So what we are facing now is really, we move from politics to a diplomatic issue. Smallness and power. How do we deal with that? What is the wiggle room for small economies to have a say in international organizations, and especially in today's world? And I will just end by quoting one of the well-known writers, Richard Bernal, talking on this issue about dealing with the influence of small states and superpowers. And this is what he said. On an island, you are disconnected, with water all around you, acknowledging that there is a center elsewhere, yet concluding that a small country can influence a more powerful country, even a superpower. That is the challenge. And that is where we have to find the diplomatic outlet. So there's a recent book, very recent, just published, by Tom Long. The title of the book is that there is no map. Speaking to the issue of international relations in Latin America. We are in a period where there is no map. I started the discussion by showing you the two maps. But what we are getting here, in terms of the conduct of international relations, there is no map. And in that sense, this book is very well received. Looking at Latin America, in which it is claiming that in Latin American countries, the conduct of international relations has to be redone on the basis that there is no map. So, my friends, these are some of the issues that I wanted to raise with you. I thank you for this opportunity to share them with you, and of course, we'll be very happy to elaborate further on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winston, for the powerful introduction regarding regionalism in the Caribbean, as well as some insights for us in the Pacific. We have some time for questions and answers, and since Winston has traveled all the way from Trinidad and Tobago, we can't let him go without asking a few questions. So, based on the time I have, we might be able to take perhaps 3 questions to the max, but let's see how the responses go. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and question. So this is just for Winston and not for John Feeks or the Vice Chancellor.
Thank you. My name is Winston Thompson, and as a graduate of the University of the West Indies in 1962, I'd like to congratulate our speaker for giving us the Caribbean perspective. I have always maintained a very fond memory of my 4 years in Trinidad at the St. Augustine campus, and represented Trinidad in a number of sporting events, so I was created an honorary citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. But thank you for your presentation, and I think we're fortunate to be able to get the perspective of a statesman from your region, because the Pacific is in need of a sense of direction, and examples from similar areas of the world, such as the Caribbean, I think stands us in good stead. And thank you very much for that. Thank you.
That's a comment. Seems like no more questions. Would you want to respond to that, Winston?
Mr. Walker, thank you very much for your comments. I do appreciate your stay at the University of the West Indies, and that you are now one of us as an honorary citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. I hope one day I could become an honorary citizen of Fiji if I continue to be involved with my good friends here. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Oh, we do have one question.
Thank you very much, Winston. That was a superb address. I'd like to ask you about knowledge diplomacy as a tool. You talked about it as one of the key factors in development, and towards the end you talked about moving from politics to diplomatic power. Could you elaborate on that in relation to the Pacific? Thank you.
I think there is a new term that has, well, not really a term, it has been there, but it's taken a new dimension, which is really an element of knowledge diplomacy coming into the game of international relations. Not as an instrument of foreign policy, but as an instrument of collaborative thinking between countries and institutions to solve global problems, as well as to solve individual responses to the new global scenario. And therefore, what we are seeing now is the emergence of knowledge diplomacy getting roots. Since there are no real answers, we have to go back to find out what are the sources of the missing links. And it is that calls for a challenge for diplomacy as well. Traditional diplomacy has always been seen as a foreign policy that has an interest to promote. I used to be foreign minister, so I know very well how that could sometimes prevent you from solving global problems or taking positions. So apart from talking about the issue of politics and economics, the issue of diplomacy and the new diplomacy is required. Now this is more so now because the transatlantic powers are moving inward in all their manifestation. And therefore, the voice, the wiggle room for small states has become even less than it has been in the past. And small states have relied on multilateralism and the legal order as the basis for the practice of diplomacy. Both of those concepts are now under scrutiny in the world. So that leaves small states with no pillars upon which to build a diplomacy. Now, it's not, I don't have an answer. What I can say, there's no map here either. But it's a real challenge to diplomacy and conduct of international relations to small states. And that's why I titled my talk that Caribbean is on a standstill, not knowing where to turn and how to turn. And it's not a reflection on the Caribbean, it's a reflection on the state of the world in which small states are now placed.
Thank you. I guess we'll have to bring this session to a close now. Let us thank all the speakers of this. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today. You can catch Winston during the next 3 days. He'll be here, and you can ask him more questions. If we delay any further, then the next session will be delayed. So sorry for that, but you can always catch Winston during the tea break. So I'd like to thank all the speakers of this open plenary, Professor Palalwalia, John Fix, and in particular our keynote speaker, Winston Dukaran. I think this opening plenary has set a very good platform for discussion for the next 3 days. So let's thank all the speakers of this plenary session. So tea and lunch will be served in the car park outside this venue. If you need any help, you can ask one of our student volunteers. We have student volunteers from USP and INU, and today they are wearing blue t-shirts. So this is the Japan ICT Conference Center, the main venue for the conference. Video conference room and 1 and 2 opposite the main doors on the top. So with these words, thank you very much for attending, and tea and refreshments will be served outside.